Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, a show that uncovers what's fact, what's fake, and what's fun in the crazy world of pseudo-archaeology. Hello and welcome to the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, episode 145. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and tonight, Helena Madame Blavatsky. Why do we care about Helena Madame Blavatsky? We should not care about Helena Madame Blavatsky. Okay, so I've been being a good host, listening to you guys, giving you what you want. People ask me questions, and they're like, hey, we want to know about Madame Blavatsky, Kinkella, so you need to talk about Madame Blavatsky. And I have to tell you guys, this one might have destroyed me. It's funny. They come out of left field. You're doing Loch Ness Monster, or you're doing Atlantis, you're doing Bigfoot, whatever. And those are like known quantities. You know what's coming. If you're going to do Atlantis, you know the foolishness, the various stories, and there's kind of like a fun in it, which is why I do this. But I have to say, when it comes to like these pseudo-religious figures, these guys are the worst. Because ultimately, for me, they're just not that fun. And it's because they're just so obviously full of BS, and they just get these sycophants that believe their dumbass ideas, and they just never die. Like a new generation takes it up. And in this case, it's not a ton of people. It's not like the Madame Blavatsky stuff. Again, just the name. How many times have we done this where it's like, if you've grown up with a name like Helena Blavatsky, what are your options? You're going to just have to be an occult leader. So, behind the scenes when I do this show, I do care about getting like the facts right, more or less. And it does take me a bit of time, to kind of look things up. And I'm always a little insecure. I really am, about talking about these topics, because sometimes, actually often, I'll know something about it, like I'll be like, oh yeah, like I'll recognize the name. I'll know like one or two kind of fun little stories or something. But in order to get things right, I want to like do a bit of a deep dive. I'll go online and, look some stuff up. I might have a book or two that might help me, like stuff by like Ken Fader or Jason Colavito. There's a Jeb Card, these kind of names of people like myself who have sort of spent a portion of their career dealing with pseudoscience or pseudo-archaeology, and I'll look some of that stuff up. And because again, I do want to get it right underneath it all. I have to tell you guys, this is the first time. What episode are we? 145. This is the first time that I just don't give a damn. And it's nothing personal. Let me explain. It's nothing against you guys as my audience. I love my audience. And I love doing this show. It's nothing against the show. What it's against is Madame Blavatsky, because she is so full of shit that I just don't want to put it all in my brain. And I wonder, I bet you anything that those guys that I just listed, the Ken Faders of the world, the Jason Colavitos of the world, I'm sure they've gotten to that same limit where it's like, I have a limited number of storage brain cells. Do I want to use them on this utter pointless dreck? And so I'm going to give you the story of Madame Blavatsky, of course. But as we go through it, I'll generalize a few things because it's not worth your time. It's not worth my time to get this stuff completely right because it's all bullshit, you guys. It's all just fakery, obvious lies, obvious made up at the last minute, this kind of thing by these type of people who are basically, these guys are all the same. They sort of have a narcissistic streak. They think they are literally like the second coming. They think that their word is the word of God or the ancients or whatever label you want to give. And they just blather nonsense, and unfortunately somebody was there to write it down. And we have to deal with it decades later. Boy, what a waste of time. So, if you look up Helena Blavatsky, she is listed as a mystic. And I always wonder if you call yourself a mystic, do you put that on your tax records? Occupation, mystic, whatever. And if you do look her up, this typical sort of fakery charlatan stuff that she does. So she was born in 1831 and she's going to die in 1891. And what that means, as we often talk about, she's going to be active or doing stuff that we care about in like the 1870s, 1880s, right? That's when she's making her mark. She's Russian and she grows up in Russia. And as it is with these fake charlatan type people, it's actually kind of hard to reconstruct her early life because she, as she got older, added a fake history to herself, where she said she'd been to all these places and met all these mystical, very important people, right? But so much of it is just a big fat lie that her true story, and truth is not something these people are into, is basic. She was born, she was raised in Russia. This is before the revolution, right? This is in the 1800s. So she was like a part of the aristocrat society. She grew up as a rich Russian. Yeah, good way to grow up if you're in the 1830s and 40s in Russia. It's much better to be rich than be poor. And again, this is in the time, if you look her up, if you don't dig too much, it'll say stuff like she traveled widely at this time. No, she didn't. It's just all part of her fake origin mythology that she writes for herself. And what she's known for and what we'll dive into is writing a couple books. Her most famous ones are Isis Unveiled in 1877 and The Secret Doctrine in 1888. And we'll dissect these a little bit later, but I will tell you that sometimes I'll mix up which bits of bullshit go into which one, so I think I'll kind of treat them together. Basically, for me, Isis Unveiled is a little bit more basic, and then The Secret Doctrine, it has a little bit more specifics to it, but it's all kind of the same stuff. She is best known for creating what is called the Theosophical Society. And these are the same as any other cult or pseudo-religious movement, right? It starts basically with one crazy person, and then the crazy person gets a couple sycophants. And it seems to me, you guys, it's like as soon as you get 3 or 4 sycophants, you're good to go. Then it just sort of grows and people kind of come and they kind of leave the Theosophical Society, but you get this core of focused, brainwashed sycophants and you're good to go. And she got that, ultimately. What is the Theosophical Society? This kind of stuff, this is always tough for me. I never understand, like the idea of like sort of esoteric belief systems. We've touched on some of this stuff before, like Rosicrucianism has aspects of it that it all kind of relates into this kind of Western tradition of esotericism. For me, it's just New Age beliefs. That's what this stuff all is for me. If you really want to parse it out, the label of New Age is very much a 20th century thing, but I think for ease of just understanding, this is where kind of the New Age movement originally comes from. It's this kind of stuff. And what is it ultimately going to be? It's just this singular woman literally making shit up, and it's obvious, right? And she just sort of pastes it all together but she's enough of a self-centered narcissist that she's like, oh yeah, this is great. And then there are people gullible enough to look at it and go, oh yeah, oh, this is great. So Helena Blavatsky does have some interesting bits and bobs to her life, the real parts, the parts she doesn't focus on as much, but she will ultimately move to India for a while in I think the late 1870s. And that's where she does a lot of her quote unquote work, otherwise known as bullshitting. But her work, does it in India. She does convert to Buddhism. And it is interesting at that time to have Westerners convert to Buddhism, right? That's really, really rare. So she does do that. She will ultimately expand the Theosophical Society at that point, and then she'll fall into ill health. She'll come back to England, or ultimately end up, I should say, I believe in England. Jeez, is it England or the United States? I'm not sure. To the West. Look at that. For her later life, and she'll ultimately die. I think she had kidney disease, basically, and she will ultimately die in 1891. But we will fill this in. Oh, and why do we care? Because this is one of the sort of the Blavatsky story is one of the bricks in the wall of the sort of pseudoscience, new agey movement that's really, been with us for the last, 150 years or so. Anyway, more on that when we come back.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudo-Archaeological Podcast, episode 145, with your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and we have been discussing the one, the only, thank God, Madame Blavatsky. And so, what is this Theosophical Society thing that she started? So the word theosophical, if you cut it in half, you have theo and sophical. Theo means God, and Sophic means wisdom. So the Theosophical Society means the God Wisdom Society. And what you ultimately get from this, again, to make it make sense, just think back to kind of typical New Age belief system. So a Theosophical Society, what they're really looking for is kind of a base connection, like an ancient base connection between science, religion, and philosophy all together, right? This idea that there's this one seed from time immemorial, right? There's this one seed kind of running through all of us. And we need to study this. We need to focus and go down deep and, look under every stone to sort of find these lineages of it that surely go back through history and time immemorial, right? This kind of ideology, the sort of base, sort of singular story underneath it all, very similar, gives you vibes of stuff like Graham Hancock, right? This idea that, yes, at the end of the last ice age, there was this one super civilization that connected everywhere, that interconnected the world. This ideology, this is the thing that it is always with us. You know what I mean? We're just all interconnected. And of course, it's because this kind of ideology is so satisfying. That would be awesome if ultimately there was one religion and sort of religion and science and philosophy all went together as like one mantra, and this ideology that we've somehow lost it. Whether you look at modern New Age or you look at Graham Hancock, it's this idea of modern culture has lost the thread. We need to get back to some sort of ancient wisdom that we once had. You know what I mean? And you can see how that can be super attractive to people who maybe feel a little lost. And in the modern world, it really feels like that, right? With technology and all this AI, we just feel like, geez, or just cell phones and being on screens all the time. It's like, man, have we lost our humanity, right? It gets very philosophical very quick. And I think a lot of us do feel that way. I feel that way lots of times, that, technology unhinged and environmental destruction and all that kind of stuff. Oh, can we get back to whatever that is? I think it's just so much more satisfying if there was something like the Theosophical Society, if it had some reality to it. You'd be like, oh yeah, we could do this like focused work and get something good. Unfortunately, it's just a total house of cards and it's total bullshit, but it gets followers. I mean, I want to be a follower, but unfortunately there's reality, and reality is hard. See, these choices are easy, but the hard work is what we all truly need to do, which is why you need to follow me. Okay. Don't be following Madame Blavatsky. You need to follow Andrew Kinkella. I didn't want to tell you guys this, but I am the Messiah. So I just, oops, surprise. Anyway, where were we? So Madame Blavatsky, gets together this Theosophical Society, and she does get one or two sycophants to go with her on this. Insert every cliche. Oh, this guy named Henry Steele Olcott is one of her earliest kind of sycophants and partners. And they together actually both convert to Buddhism when they both go to India. Interesting, So it's in these earlier days, and this is, I don't know, 1870s. Blavatsky's going to write Isis Unveiled in the earlier days. She's going to go to India, and she just digs down ever deeper into stuff that's more and more difficult to believe. At first, a lot of this stuff turns on people who she calls the masters, who are basically mysterious Indian men, right? That are in India, that she always says that she's visited, and they've shown her visions. They've shown her how to wield the paranormal, right? And they've shown her how to do things like travel along the astral plane. And these masters, and of course, they're always kept vague. Oh, the masters. And that term is always used in, sort of new age, folksy, pseudo-religious stuff. Oh, the masters. There's other terms you'll hear all the time, like an adept, who's somebody who's, learned the ways of something useful like alchemy. Really? You're going to try and sell me alchemy? So she's met with the masters, which nobody ever saw her do, or there's no actual recordings of this, but you need to believe her. She's met with the masters. She knows how to astral travel. She knows how to deal in the world of the paranormal. She has visions, right? And she's learned this all in the secret ancient language of Senzar, right? Which is a form of ancient Sanskrit, which is also a complete lie and doesn't exist. But she talks about it, right? Because you have to have this ancient stuff, have that mystique. It's all about the mystique. And that's why they use words like this, like they come up with some term like Senzar. And, oh, yes, I learned from the masters. It's just, it's so cheesy. It's so cliche, right? We would not believe this in a modern movie, but I guess it could just get over the bar in 1870. And now, since it's old, we're talking 150 years, it has that sheen of, well, it's been around for 150 years. Bullshit can last forever. See Atlantis. Oh, speaking of Atlantis, you'll never guess where Helena Blavatsky connects all this stuff to. Yes, even here. I know. There's no getting away. Of course, all this stuff goes back to Atlantis, right? And of course, it's also connected to Egypt. You know this story. I don't even need to tell it to you. You know, it's just the same old thing. Because it's the easiest way back. Like if you're ignorant about ancient history, as all these guys were, right? Even for the time, they just, if you're a bullshit artist and you want to like impress people in the moment, you're just going to go on your limited knowledge. People still do this today. Just go online, right? Of, oh yeah, well, it's connected to Atlantis and the Egyptians. And then you're going to throw the easy labels like the title of her first book, Isis Unveiled. You're going to use Isis because it's the easy term, the easy name that everyone knows. I'm sure the next book would have been Horus Veiled Again. You know, this is not hard. Oh, obviously the masters showed her I think the book of Dizyan, I think it's called. I believe this is what's written in Senzar. Again, I could be wrong and I don't care. Yeah, the new me. But this is supposedly from Tibet and they showed it to her, you know, in Tibet, which of course nobody else has ever seen. And it has nothing to do with reality. It's a total hoax. It's fake. She made it up. So that's what Isis Unveiled is basically. Hey, all of this is connected. And then do as I say and don't look too deep. When we return, the scintillating end to Madame Blavatsky. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, episode 145. And we have been talking about Madame Blavatsky. And so in her world of lies and silliness, what's a bummer to me is there's one or two facts that are really interesting. And my favorite fact by far for Madame Blavatsky is that in 1871, she was on a boat that exploded. A boat that exploded. And, you know, think of a full-size ship, like a passenger steamer or that kind of thing. Exploded. She was one of 16 survivors. That's a good story. See, Madame Blavatsky, that's the thing I want to hear about. I want to hear about your like experiences, you know, being on a boat with that kind of catastrophe and being one of the very few survivors. You know, she also did indeed travel to Egypt and I believe did meet Gaston Maspero, who was an early figure, of course, in the 1870s in the, I would say, in making Egyptian archaeology more professional, sort of in doing away with all the looting and stuff. So that's really cool. She met some really interesting people. But, you know, of course, she, I think brought in a group or called a group, the Brotherhood of Luxor. I forget that's in there too. You know, see, Brotherhood of Luxor, the term, you know, so easy. You can make that up in 2 seconds. Like an 8-year-old can do this, and bringing them into the Theosophical Society, collecting people who you would refer to as spiritualists. I believe they're like mystics. I think you can put that on your IRS records too. No, I'm a spiritualist, dude. No, I don't need to pay taxes. I'm a spiritualist. It's religious. So, in terms of her books, I did forget to tell you, there's huge portions of Isis Unveiled that were plagiarized by Madame Blavatsky, of course, from other sources, other writings. But do we really care? It's just plagiarized from other New Age bullshit. So it's like how if you've watched too many episodes of Ancient Aliens actually is plagiarizing itself now because it's run out of topics. So it just kind of redoes itself. And I think that's very similar here. As we go forward in time, again, you know, Madame Blavatsky is going more and more out there. She tells people that she materialized a cup under the ground. Like, I guess she buried a cup and then some people came by and had a picnic like in the backyard, you know, and then she dug it up and went, hey, look, a cup. I just materialized that. I'm not kidding. I made up the thing about the picnic, but the cup thing is true, right? That's one thing she was purported to have done. She visited some caves in India called the Karla Caves. And these are these kind of rock cut carved out caves that look really nice, right? They look much more man-made because they're kind of carved out and they're very interesting. But of course, as soon as she visited them, she's like, oh, the masters live way beneath here. Yes. Just believe me. Don't look too close. So, and she calls the masters the Mahatma. Just cliche, cliche-ridden Indian words, typical New Age. But, of course, as she moves on and writes The Secret Doctrine in 1888, she adds a bunch of stuff. She's not a fan of Charles Darwin because evolution doesn't explain the astral plane. I guess Darwin needs to get on that, when he was dealing with his finches. He should have looked for finches on the astral plane, but, Darwin. But she did. This is interesting. I didn't know this. She did add the idea of prehistoric extraterrestrials, as kind of the idea of extraterrestrials, both as ancients and as the next evolutionary step. So I guess you could say I was wrong when I said that H.P. Lovecraft was the first one to add kind of the extraterrestrial alien vibe to stuff, because he's doing it in like the 1930s. Helena Blavatsky may have beat him because she's doing this in the 1880s. So this might be ground zero for Ancient Aliens. So I stand corrected. I got to give it to her. And H.P. Lovecraft was in all this stuff too. So you guys, as always, it's all interrelated, right? It's the same handful of people who are kind of like doubling down on themselves. But I think it's kind of interesting. Helena Blavatsky adds the alien thing to this mix. What I do think is fascinating, yet not yet is by the time that Blavatsky has to move back to Europe, right, in like 1885 or so, is I think when she moves back. She's been in India for a while. By that time, there are like 120 or so lodges dedicated to the Theosophical Society. That's how easy it is to birth a religion, my friends. You just have to be a weird woman who just talks out her ass and just throws in some pseudo-religious psychobabble, and you get 120 lodges. And those are groups, separate groups of people who believe in this. I believe the word of the day should be mumbo jumbo. Belief in mumbo jumbo. So isn't that wild, though? Although I will say most are in India because, she's pulling some new age, thin ideology from deeper Indian religions. So that's where most of the lodges are. But there's some throughout. It's continued onward since then. But I would say that the Theosophical Society sort of continued on in a small but steady drip. They did for a while write like a Theosophic, I think it's called the Theosophist magazine, that was actually pretty successful for a little while near the end of her life. And there you kind of have it, right? So it seems like she was always, what was she like as a person? I think she was kind of prickly. They talk about her as always sort of dressing unkempt, very anti-Victorian for the times, but it goes with that vibe, right? She's playing the part. I dress unkempt because I'm this adept. I'm this mystic, so I got to play the part of the mystic. I'm unkempt and, it's all about my ideas. It's not about how I look, you have to listen to me. That sort of Yoda vibe. I think she did that, her whole life, or at least her whole adult life. As time went on with the Theosophic Society, of course, you also had people higher ups in it who were accused of things like extortion, misappropriation of funds. And I think one of the women named Emma Column, I think what she did was she stole, like she stole a bunch of money and then extorted Helena Blavatsky by saying, hey, man, if you out me on this, I'm going to out you and show the world that you're just a big fat fraud. So you have these like interior squabbles. Isn't this so typical, right? Of every one of these fake, dumb, like new agey, just mind control pseudo religions. how many times have we heard this story? And of course, so Blavatsky dies on the 8th of May, 1891. And why do I give you that specific date? Well, that for the Theosophists Society is White Lotus Day. So they actually have made her death day like a holiday. All right. I don't know. So why have I told you this story? Why do people ask me to? I've heard this one again and again, and I didn't know as much about Madame Blavatsky as I did, of other people like von Däniken or, pick your poison. I'd heard her name for a long time, but I didn't know more of the details. It's because she's, I would say, a key figure in the sort of pseudo-archaeology movement, right? In the 1880s, she's just another brick in the pseudo-archaeology wall. And what's so interrelated, and again, as I've done this show, I've noticed more and more interrelation to this. Pseudo-archaeology and New Age mysticism, they do this dance together throughout time. It goes right together, because both of them have this thin, basically ignorant seeds of sort of pseudo-intellectualism, just half truths and base knowledge of Egypt or Atlantis or some sort of lost civilization, and vague ideas on masters or ancient ones, or right, pick your label. It's the same idea, and that we're all kind of lost. And again, we feel that loss, and we want to get back to something from the past. But the sad bummer is that thing we're trying to get back to and re-find was never there in the first place. So instead of falling under the sway of Madame Blavatsky and taking a lot of time to become an adept at alchemy, maybe use that time instead to make a friend, get to know your neighbors. I don't know. Go have lunch together. It's a much better use of your time. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Pseudo Archaeology Podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you like and subscribe. And if you have questions for me, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, feel free to reach out using the links below or go to my YouTube channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. See you guys next time.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.